Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nash Villager podcast. It's February 7th, 2025. On this day in 1812, Tennessee was shaken by one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded in the United States. Tremors along the New Madrid Fault had begun a couple of months prior, but this day was the big one, and its effects could still be seen today. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. There are hundreds of lakes in Tennessee, but only one of any size is natural. And before the giant earthquake in 1812, Tennessee didn't even have that one. Experts these days estimate that it was an 8.8 on the Richter scale. To put that into context, in the era since the seismograph was invented, there have only been a few stronger earthquakes recorded anywhere on the globe. Another 8.8 down in South America in 2010 devastated cities in the nation of Colombia and created a tsunami that reached Japan. Now, the fault line in the 1812 quake was very near the Mississippi River in southeast Missouri, and the ground under the water opened up in several places, creating fissures and depressions that in turn created swirling whirlpools. Mississippi River islands that had previously been home bases for river pirates simply disappeared, sunk under the level of the water. For a short time, the river essentially ran backwards, and the water pushed through areas that had not previously been in the river's course. And then, as things returned to normal, some of that redirected water was trapped in a depression made by the shifting earth, and that formed the body of water we now know as Reelfoot Lake. Shallow, lined with cypress trees, home to an incredible array of birds, including bald eagles. So how did we end up with a whole bunch of other lakes? Well, we made them. Through the middle of the 20th century, the Tennessee Valley Authority and, to a lesser extent, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built dams along the state's largest rivers. They flooded lowland areas, creating new opportunities for fishing, boating, and swimming. And more importantly, they harnessed the power of the water rushing through those dams to create electricity. Ironically, given the TVA's current status as one of the utilities most hostile to clean energy, it was created specifically to utilize a renewable energy source. Honestly, it's kind of mind-blowing, though, just to realize how much of the aquatic landscape of Tennessee has changed since the state was founded in 1796, which makes those waterways that are primarily still in their original natural condition all the more special and valuable. First among those has to be the Duck River. It is the most biologically diverse waterway in North America. Quite simply, it's a treasure. I love it also as a place where I first learned to paddle a canoe. And my husband and I took our kayaks out on a stretch of it last spring, so I can attest that it is still as gorgeous as ever. The thing is, the Duck runs through part of Middle Tennessee that's growing by leaps and bounds. Bedford County, Murray County. More and more people are moving into these areas that draw their drinking water from the Duck, which leaves less and less water actually in the river. That's raised red flags for environmentalists. But just this week, a settlement agreement was announced that creates new protections for the Duck. Basically, everyone's got to get more serious about drought planning, setting new benchmarks for what water levels will trigger conservation measures. And that goes all the way down to simple common sense things like making sure the water systems aren't leaky. Or, in other words, that they don't waste what water they do take through sloppiness. And this is something that now all sides have agreed to do. In just a few minutes, Nashville's songwriting culture meets hip-hop. That's coming up after the newscast.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
Here's the mantra I think about at WPLN. We Connect the Dots. It captures a mindset that our journalism is not merely about the latest press release or proclamations by officials. Instead, we can develop expertise, dig deeper, and look to history to understand what's happening now. I'm Tony Gonzalez, news director. When I'm planning coverage and editing stories, the best part is being part of a team that's curious about our community and invested in its future.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. A storm damage survey team will be out today in parts of Putnam and Overton counties north of Cookeville, where residents were under a tornado warning last night. There were reports of wind damage across at least a 9-mile area. That includes the community of Rickman, where trees and power lines were down and some buildings were impacted. When someone is ordered to surrender their guns in Tennessee, they can give them to a third party like a friend or a relative. It's one of the only states that does not require that person to be identified in court, a loophole that leaves domestic violence victims vulnerable. But that could soon change. WPLN's Paige Flager reports that Republicans filed legislation this week that would alter the state's form, requiring the name, the address, and a signature of the recipient of the guns.
Rural Scott County, Tennessee changed the way it separates dangerous people from guns. Under this proposed legislation, the rest of the state would follow suit.
You are kidding me! Oh my gosh, how awesome for victims across the state!
Christy Harness has worked in domestic violence in Scott County for decades. The bill was inspired by WPLN and ProPublica's reporting in her county, which has already amended the state form to identify the third party in hopes of adding an extra layer of accountability to the process.
It's already a law that this is supposed to happen. We just want it to be implemented.
A key part of their work is ensuring violent people do not have access to weapons when they're legally not supposed to. Research has shown that domestic violence incidents are more likely to become lethal when a firearm is involved.
It really is an added protection for the peace of mind of victims.
Judge Scarlett Ellis oversees the domestic violence court in Scott County. She says she has not run into any compliance problems with the amended form, even in a rural, conservative, Second Amendment-friendly county like hers.
This is just a clear example of when a community gets behind enforcing a law. It doesn't matter how big you are or how small you are. Changes can be made.
While amending the form is a simple step, the stakes are high. Tennessee consistently has one of the highest rates of women killed by men, and most of those homicides are committed with guns. Christy Harness says it's a simple change with a potentially massive payoff.
Maybe we've done that extra step to save somebody's life.
Paige Flager, WPLN News.
Tennessee schools could refuse to teach undocumented students under a new proposal from Republican leaders in the State House. WPLN's Miriam reports the measure goes against U.S. Supreme Court precedent.
And that's kind of the point. The bill's House sponsor, William Lamberth, says the proposal is a challenge to a 1982 Supreme Court case, which established the right to education for undocumented students. The legislation comes after the Rutherford County School Board said that the number of English language learners has put a financial strain on their district.
If they don't like that, they can go to some state that's a sanctuary state, but we're not going to take money away from the educational system that is there for legal residents and U.S. citizens and educate children that are illegal immigrants. That's just where we stand on the issue.
Lamberth isn't just expecting a lawsuit, he's counting on it to bring the issue back to the courts. That move has become part of the Republican playbook, says ACLU attorney Stella Yarbrough.
The bet that this Supreme Court, being how it is, with 6 very conservative judges who have indicated that they are willing to shred existing court precedent, that they're reading the tea leaves correctly, that if they can tee up challenges to cases that were close calls, I think that they are correct, that they are going to get a second bite at the apple.
Yarbrough says that even though she knows the endgame, delaying the bill from taking effect for even a day or a week can mean a lot to these students. Tennessee was before the Supreme Court late last year to defend its ban on gender-affirming care for minors. When that ruling comes out this summer, state Republicans will see if their strategy works with the new Supreme Court. Mariana Baca-Yao, WPLN News.
A member of a neo-Nazi hate group has been arrested again. Police arrested the same man in Nashville on assault charges last summer. A Davidson County grand jury has now indicted the 29-year-old Canadian Ryan Scott McCann on charges of civil rights intimidation and assault. That's based on an investigation into an altercation between McCann and a 20-year-old Jewish man from Clarksville. McCann had been on an ankle monitor and prohibited from leaving Davidson County as a condition of his bond. He was taken back into custody yesterday. A 12-year-old at Head Middle School has been arrested and charged in juvenile court with making a threat of mass violence at school. Police say the threat was posted 2 days after the fatal shooting inside Antioch High School and that detectives worked to identify the student. It was the 12th such arrest since the attack in Antioch. You can learn more about Tennessee's heightened penalty for threats by reading recent investigative reporting in partnership with ProPublica on our website at WPLN.org. The investors trying to buy the scrapyard along Nashville's East Bank are working to raise $350 million. The group is led by real estate investor David Byerly and Samuel Lingo, the former president of Nashville Entrepreneur Center. They are currently under contract to purchase the land. The exact price of the lot is unclear. The Nashville Business Journal reports that some sources have indicated the current owner of the scrapyard, billionaire Carl Icahn, is looking for upwards of $200 million. The metal recycling yard has long been the scourge of many city leaders. Its prime location across the river from downtown Nashville places it squarely within Metro's plan to revitalize the East Bank. If the yard does sell, it could be incorporated into that plan. A law passed last year by Tennessee is now being paralleled in a measure from two Kentucky lawmakers. They want to ban what they call geoengineering. Kentucky Public Radio's Joe Sonka reports that these theoretical methods of countering climate change do not yet exist, even though some claim to already see them in the sky.
Academics over the past decade have debated whether it is possible or practical to try various geoengineering methods to curb climate change. One untested method is to disperse particles in the atmosphere that would reflect more sunlight, cooling the Earth. Republican Representative John Hodgson of Louisville has filed a bill to prevent such activities in Kentucky.
I believe in clean air and clean water. We got to take care of the planet, and I don't like the idea of people experimenting, trying to play God and manipulate the weather.
Tennessee became the first state to pass such a bill into law last year, though its lead sponsor and others, such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., basically claim that such methods are already happening, visible in white streaks across the sky trailing planes. Some claim these are proof of so-called chemtrails, a decades-old conspiracy theory that has now latched on to the geoengineering debate. Hodgson, an aviation engineer, has had to explain to supporters that those streaks are natural and not part of a government conspiracy. Holly Buck is a geoengineering researcher at the University at Buffalo. A survey she conducted found 20% believe the government is already conducting geoengineering, while half are unsure.
People are just making sense of what they read on the internet and filtering it through their own lenses.
She says academics are having a rigorous debate about geoengineering, but the debate over legislation is often not based in fact. I'm Joe Sonka in Louisville.
Nashville's musicians are now able to access cheaper parking when they're playing gigs across the city. Last year, parking lot operator Metropolis introduced a discount parking program for musicians working downtown. Now that program has been expanded to 23 different lots citywide, targeting areas around independent music venues. The program provides musicians with a 60% discount. Those eligible can access the discount through QR codes provided by venues or through the Downtown Musicians Facebook page.
You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org.
Nashville songwriting is big business. It supplies the country music industry with material, gospel and contemporary Christian too, but it's largely shut out those who specialize in hip-hop and R&B. Senior music writer Julie Height says that two music companies are trying to change that. Recently, they called on their rap connections and assembled their first Nashville writing camp together. This is the second story in Julie's series on new efforts to build up the business around Nashville hip-hop.
One morning in November, producer Ryder Johnson arrived at the Nashville offices of his music publisher, Prescription Songs, with his laptop and external hard drive, ready to get down to the business of beat making. First, though, he was presented with paperwork.
It's like to say that we're splitting everything equally so there's nobody can get screwed over, basically. It's just to protect everybody. And I think that's a very, very good idea.
There are real commercial stakes for the collaboration ahead. Johnson's one of nearly 24 music makers who are scheduled to spend a few days holed up in the studio in predetermined groups of 3 or 4. Their collective assignment? to create tracks tailored to well-known rappers. Plenty of hip-hop hits originate at songwriting camps like this, just not in Nashville. A song that Johnson worked on at an LA camp landed in the Fast and Furious franchise. But he's based in Nashville, and so are a number of other rap and R&B specialists that prescription staffers like Kelly White want to provide greater opportunities to right here.
Bigger things rather than just small writers' rounds. We really want to put the spotlight on the talent and give them a real way to make money and get their name out there.
Dramatized, a company started by rap super producer and MTSU grad Tay Keith, seemed like the ideal partner. Keith built his studio in Nashville, and that's a sign of investment, says his co-CEO Cambrian Strong.
We've been heavily planning, specifically figuring out ways we can be more impactful in Nashville. We just came to the conclusion that we should do a camp with prescription to start somewhere,
The two companies drew on their rosters and connections to set it up. They arranged for A&R people whose job it is to find material for established acts like Houston melodic rapper Don Toliver to describe the vibe they're looking for. Here's Prescription's Anae Richardson.
So we just had our Zoom A&R briefing for Don Toliver. Don's basically taking hooks. He's in his rock star era, so he wants really hard-hitting drums, turn-up records.
Richardson played matchmaker with the camp participants, deciding whose styles and skills would go well together. Johnson's joined by dramatized producer DJ Meech and a pair of artists, DB Bantino and Casper Sage, who'll focus on vocal hooks. Meech and Johnson take turns on the computer, shaping samples into a dramatic crescendoing pattern.
What I'm trying to do, Robin?
What?
I'm trying to pick the melody that switch up the most. I'm trying to keep having the drums switching.
Okay. So this part first.
This part is beautiful.
They tinker with song structure for well over an hour, trying to match the length of the new track with Toliver's past releases. Then they add a bass drop and muscular trap drums to amp up the energy. Bantino and Sage sit in opposite corners of the room, quietly testing melodic ideas and typing lyrics into their phones. Then Bantino sits down at the laptop to engineer, while Sage starts laying down a vocal part.
Drowning in the mud, don't know if I make it out this club. Blue flame still is green up in my veins. Boot thing, could I get the metronome?
He does multiple takes, then hands the mic to Bantino, who adds his own moody melody lines. For a couple of them, these songwriting camps are still pretty new, and for the rest, the new part is doing this in Nashville. By the end of the afternoon, they've each contributed to the making of a song that might have a future.
How y'all feeling? You think it's gonna get cut?
Yes. I try to feel like that on every song.
I try not to even think about it.
Me neither. I don't even know.
Afterwards, the dramatized and prescription teams listen to all the music and start pitching it. One track that Toliver's A&R guy likes features a writer who wasn't originally supposed to take part in the camp, independent Nashville MC Seti Mack. He got a text inviting him to a session by mistake. It was meant for a Florida artist with a similar name, but Seti Mack showed up and delivered a slew of strong hooks to Richardson's delight.
It turned out when we were talking to Seti, he was like, yeah, that was only my third session I've ever did in my life. And we were like, what? And he was like, yeah, and after that I just went to work.
As in his non-musical gig. That was confirmation that they should tap more Nashville hip-hop talent for future camps. That publishing income can be a game changer, especially for musicians who've been shut out of the traditional music industry in their hometown. For Nashville Public Radio, I'm Julie Height.
Thanks for listening to the Nashvillager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. And you can become a member at WPLN.org. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one. And we'll catch back up next week.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.